Lewis and Clark's expedition across America, an exploration led by two men, ultimately known as Lewis and Clark. The exchange and encounter of new cultures and friendship is considered one of the most important expeditions in American history. On April 30th, 1803, the United States agreed to purchase the Louisiana Territory from France for $15 million, and it consisted of 828,000 square miles of land, and at pennies an acre, it was a deal the U.S. could not turn down. It spanned from the Mississippi River to the east of the Rocky Mountains and doubled the size of the U.S. overnight. Prior to the purchase, former President Thomas Jefferson had ideas and plans for a great and vast journey across the unknown charter of land. President Jefferson, beginning in 1803, began to present plans for the expedition to the U.S. Senate. These plans remained highly secretive to the American people, and although the purchase had no direct borders, it was stated that the land would consist from the Mississippi to the Rockies, although Jefferson's plans were for it to go beyond the mountains, in which the Spanish controlled the southwest and the British controlled the northwest. By mid-1803, Jefferson had selected his personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis, to lead this expedition. Lewis would appoint former Army officer William Clark to co-lead it. The two would lead 50 other Americans with objectives to study the land, the wildlife, and to set up good relations with Native Americans they encountered. Meriwether Lewis, Jefferson's personal secretary, was born near Ivy, Virginia on August 18, 1774. Lewis's father had been an Army officer in the military during the American Revolution and died when he was just 5 years old. Lewis later on would join the Army and achieve the rank of captain. Then, in 1801, former President Thomas Jefferson would ask Lewis to be his personal secretary, setting him up to lead the expedition. William Clark, the co-leader of the expedition, was born in Caroline County, Virginia on August 1st, 1770. His brother, George Rogers Clark, was an American Revolutionary War hero. William Clark would join the Army at the age of 19 and would remain in the Army until 1795, when he met Meriwether Lewis. The two became friends. A year later, in 1796, he would resign from the Army to manage his family's estate that he had inherited. 8 years later, after Lewis and Clark met, Lewis would send a letter to Clark asking him to join the journey across the West. In May of 1804, Lewis and Clark, along with 50 other Americans, would depart from St. Louis, Missouri. President Jefferson would name Lewis and Clark and the 50 other Americans the Corps of Discovery. It was a special army that only lasted from the beginning of the expedition to the end. In early September, they would reach the Great Plains, and by October, they would reach the Mandan villages in what is present-day North Dakota. They would spend the winter there at Fort Mandan, which the Mandan Indians built for the Corps of Discovery. While there, they would explore the Indians' ideas and ways to hunt buffalo. The Mandans would also prepare for a higher exchange of goods and trade by the time the Corps of Discovery would leave. While establishing good relationships with the Mandans, the Corps had acquired a great and sufficient amount of information on how to reach the Pacific Ocean. They had also hired many Frenchmen to translate and advise them. With these Frenchmen came one of the most known women in American history, Sacagawea. She was a Shoshone Indian and was 15 years old at the time of Lewis and Clark's departure from Fort Mandan. She would end up being an important piece to the success of reaching the West. By the spring of 1805, Lewis and Clark would completely leave Fort Mandan. The weather that spring had been very well in favor of travel, with water levels rising. Shortly after leaving, Sacagawea gave birth to a baby boy, Jean Baptiste. Then, 2 months later, 12 men headed back east to send maps, reports, and scientific specimens for President Thomas Jefferson to see and review. The remains of the party continued west. A dozen men would reach Jefferson by August. In early August, Sacagawea recognized Beaverhead Rock, where her people were from. Days later, Lewis and Clark encountered many mountains and began to approach towards the Continental Divide. They expected more plains to be ahead, but instead would continue across many more mountains. While crossing, Lewis made contact with the Shoshone Indians in an attempt to negotiate for horses. Weeks later, they would leave with approximately 30 horses. After the first week of September, they had arrived in what today is Missoula, Montana. They would rest and prepare for what was still ahead of them, and would barely escape the mountains in what became a case of starvation. By October, a year after meeting the Mandan Native Americans, the Corps of Discovery reached the Columbia River, and after 2 days of treading water downstream, they saw Mount Hood, which gave them reassurance that the mighty Pacific Ocean was ahead. Then, in November, a awful storm hit, delaying them for 3 full weeks. After that, a week later, they would reach the mouth of the Columbia River and in full view of the Pacific Ocean. At that point, it had been a year and a half since they had left St. Louis. A week after seeing the Pacific Ocean, a majority of the corps agreed to build a winter's quarter, naming it Fort Clatsop. In March of 1806, they presented the fort to the Clatsop Native Americans and began to head for home. One piece that remains from their return voyage is in Billings, Montana. It is on the Pompey Tower, which is a large rock that William Clark marked W. Clark and with the date July 25th, 1806. The next day, July 26th, they encountered 8 Blackfeet warriors and camped the night with them, only to find them the next morning attempting to steal their horses and guns. As a result, 2 Blackfeet warriors were killed. On September 22nd, 1806, the entire crew reached St. Louis, Missouri after 2 years, 4 months, and 8 days. They were treated as national heroes, and as a reward, they received double pay, 1,600 acres of land, and Meriwether Lewis was named the governor of the Louisiana Territory. William Clark was appointed as the Indian agent for the West and the brigadier of the Louisiana Territory's militia. Meriwether Lewis would go on to live for another 3 years and die of what was an apparent suicide, but many historians do not deny the possible idea that he was murdered. He was 35 years old. In 1812, Sacagawea would die of sickness. She was 24. William Clark would go on to take care of Sacagawea's children after her death and live until 1838. He would die at the age of 68. The three would be a part of the most important influential explorers in North American history.